Right, can you all see my screen okay? Great. If I'm using my notes, can you see my notes or can you just see the screen? Perfect, fantastic. All right, great. Well, there was a lovely introduction already, so I don't need to say anything more about myself. I'm here today to really present the evidence and what we know so far in terms of research and practice of nature-based art therapy. It's an area really, really close to my heart, and I've read so much about it, and I'm always excited to talk about this area. So I hope you find some of this information useful today. A little bit about myself. I like to be introducing myself with this slide, but I was originally qualified as a teacher back in Greece, where I'm originally from. And this is where I discovered a very strong interest about play and playing with children and how that helps to release emotions and share experiences that they wouldn't share with me otherwise. And so that made me move to Cardiff and to the University of South Wales to do a master's in therapeutic play. And then this is where I discovered my strong passion for research. So when I was doing my dissertation, I discovered that this is the career I want to follow. However, my English was not strong enough to work therapeutically in the UK, and also it was a big financial crisis in Greece. So that made me move to China, do teaching for a couple more years, but I was pursuing at the same time an online master's from the University of Stirling in clinical research. And this is what helped me then get a PhD, a fully funded PhD in art therapy. So I moved to Liverpool to Edge Hill University. And this is where I ran a trial, a pilot, a randomized control trial of art, music, drama, and dance movement psychotherapy. And then following that, my postdoc was about a project called Eco-Capabilities, which I'm going to talk about later on. But essentially, this was artists working with children in primary schools. We were taking them children outside for one full day a week. And because I'm originally from Athens, like I said, and I recently found out that Athens is apparently the city, the European city with the least green space. And so I had never been to a park in my life until I was about 24. And so having this opportunity to work in nature for a whole day every week had a really strong impact on me. And this is really since then that I started exploring how can we do more art therapies outside in nature, and also what are the practical challenges around that. So I'm going to be focusing on that today. These are the books that have really inspired me the most. So I really wanted to reference them here in case you want to look at them. A lot of the things I'll be talking about today are focused on these books. But one interesting thing that we notice when we're looking into those titles is how different terms we're using. So you can see that some authors have preferred terms such as eco-art therapy, some others prefer environmental art therapy or nature-based art therapy. So first of all, I was really curious to understand, is there any difference depending on what term we're using? And also, does it matter? So I started to dig in a little bit on that and understanding the different terms. And so these are the 5 terms that I'm coming across more often, I guess, when I'm reading various articles or book chapters. But my understanding from reading all those resources is that nature and nature-based art therapy, they're more straightforward terms. It literally means that we deliver art therapy in nature and outdoor spaces, but they don't necessarily have to do about the environment or the climate crisis, although may as well some of these things naturally emerge in the conversations. However, environmental and climate-informed art therapy, they're much more about focusing on the environment. Environmental is a bit broader than climate-informed, so it doesn't have to be about climate specifically, but climate-informed is slightly different because it's focused on the climate psychology, which is a relatively new field, but essentially it is rooted on understanding the human responses to climate crises. And according to climate-informed art therapy or climate-informed therapists, responses such as eco-distress or eco-anxiety or ecological grief are very much wanted appropriate responses to climate change, and it's actually a sign of connection and care for their environment. So we're not really, when we're saying that we're delivering climate-informed art therapy, we're not really trying to reduce those feelings of eco-distress or eco-anxiety. What we're trying to do is support people to manage those emotions in a more productive way. And finally, the term ecotherapy, although I found that it's the most commonly used so far, it is such a big umbrella term that thus far has escaped a unified definition. I found that only the American Association of Art Therapy has tried to develop a definition of eco-art therapy. However, it still appears that there are as many definitions as there are practitioners. But I think it's important to think about when we're using those terms. For example, if we're working with young people with experience of eco-anxiety, perhaps then it's appropriate to say that you can support them by providing, let's say, environmental or climate-informed art therapy. However, if you are working with some people who might not believe in environmental crisis, or perhaps they have other more pressing needs, such as dealing with poverty, if you say to them that you're offering sessions on environmental or climate-informed art therapy, they might not think that this is something of relevance to them or this is useful to them. However, if you say that you're delivering a nature-based art therapy, they might think that that's something that they want to engage with. So I think it's really interesting to reflect on those terms when we're using them and how that can impact whether or not people want to engage with us or want to participate in the sessions. Now, regardless of which terminology we're using, all of those terms are ontologically underpinned by eco-philosophy. And eco-philosophy is essentially the turn from an anthropocentric worldview, where we as humans consider ourselves as separate or superior to nature, to a more ecocentric worldview, whereby each being has meaningful existence and we should respect that. And ecopsychology is essentially the multidisciplinary field which is emerging from the combination of ecology and psychology. And ecotherapy is simply the practical application of ecopsychology. But as I said, it has escaped a unified definition so far, and there appears to be as many definitions as there are practitioners. However, when this term was first used from Kleinbell back in 1996, the term was used to describe this reciprocal process whereby healing in nature is also healing for nature. And that is because when we're in nature, it motivates us, we gradually connect with nature, and that motivates us to want to take care of nature and preserve and conserve nature. So this is why a lot of the previous authors from the books that I mentioned before are arguing that healing in nature can be healing for nature as well. Looking into art therapy specifically, I have tried to see a little bit about what do we know so far and what we don't know so far. Although this practice has been widely used for a while now, the evidence behind it is quite limited so far. So I'm going to take you through some of the studies a couple of those studies that are quite significant in this field, but also a couple of the studies that I have conducted so far that might be of interest and relevance to you. The biggest study that we have so far was conducted by Deborah Elkis-Abahoff back in 2022. So this is the largest study that involved 75 participants. It was primarily participants who did not have access to nature. So it would be people who were hospitalized, disabled, or living in rehabilitation or learning facilities, prisons, or even during COVID-19, they engaged some people who couldn't go out of their house due to the COVID-19 restrictions. And following the sessions of art therapy, they found statistically significant changes in satisfaction with life, but also they found that increases in positive affect and reductions in negative affect based on the standardized questionnaires that they used. And higher scores were achieved for people who were coming from rural communities, who potentially had access, well, I guess more access to nature than people living in urban communities. Another really interesting study was conducted, well, it's not a study, it's more than a practice. It was by Pamela Stanley. And sorry, it was actually a research study, not a practice, well, a combination of both. But essentially, they tried to to deliver in and out art therapy studio. So the people had opportunities to attend art therapy sessions outside, but also inside, doing inspired, nature-inspired art making. But essentially, they worked with people in inpatient adult mental health services and gave them the opportunity to visit areas such as wild wooded areas, ponds, really diverse spaces. And the focus of the art therapy there was to understand how our moods can change by moving from one place to the other. And the aim of this art therapy practice was essentially to act as a stepping stone that would support people to move from the inpatient settings to returning back home. So really helping them with these transitions. Another, this is the practice rather than a study, but it's from Pamela Whitaker, who is talking about Groundswell. And essentially Groundswell is an outdoor nature studio and a forest garden where art therapy, where Pamela Whitaker's art therapy is taking place. And Pamela is describing some really, really interesting techniques that we can all use in our therapy practice. One of these techniques is called the walking studio, and essentially asking people to focus on the process of art making during pedestrian travel, so traveling from one place to the other, as a form of psychogeography, so as a form of understanding our psychological responses to specific locations. And another really interesting technique that she was talking about was the imagescapes. So it was the collection of those artworks as a metaphor, as a map of our lived experience, but also as a metaphor in terms of documenting moments as they emerge and pass away. And one thing that Pamela is really arguing is that we should try to focus more on using found instead of bought objects. So think about what can we find in nature when we're working in nature that we can use in our art therapy practice. And this was, according to Pamela Whitaker, this would help us to maximize sensory engagement, but also it would help with our connection to nature. There is a lovely quote from Pamela that I would like to read here, who is arguing that becoming part of the landscape situates art therapy outside within the movements of society. As such, participants discover pedestrian serendipity, unexpected occurrences and happenings that enact personal reflections, insights, and therapeutic content. The therapeutic relationship bestows an agency to walk within society as a cultural practitioner. And so what this means for art therapy is that the world at large inspires an analysis of identity and the collective. I really like this quote from Pamela Whitaker because it really captures how working in nature can support our sense of identity and sense of place as well. Another really interesting study with children and young people was conducted by Lily Boone. And Lily Boone was really focusing on how using arts and nature-based materials can help the art therapy process. And what she found was that by using nature-based materials, it would help children to express their aggression more safely. Also gave them opportunities to explore existential themes of life, death, change, loss, and new beginnings. So things that they would be very difficult to approach otherwise, but we can do that using nature-based materials. It also gave children the sense of potency or control. So for example, working with trying to manipulate sound, there is something there quite empowering that helps children sense of control. But actually, another quite significant finding from this practice was that using nature-based materials in art therapy practice helped children to gradually start to feel more connected with nature and feel like they belong there. There is another lovely quote from Lily Boone that I would like to include here. And Lily Boone is arguing that breaking a stick is not the same as breaking a paintbrush or a pencil. It gives license and a container for healthy expression of anger, not directed at themselves, the therapist, or the room. The sense of potency and control that comes with this, such as in the creation of mess and the symbolic expressions of defense, is a necessary part of moving through anger to fear and grief beneath. I think it's a really, really powerful quote, so I would like to share that with you. And finally, another really interesting study was by Ariel Eglinton. And really what they were trying to promote this sense that we should try to practice being in nature rather than just visiting nature. So how can we really feel that we're being there? And in this chapter, basically, there was a lot of focus on trying to attune ourselves and the art therapy practice with the gradual changes that are happening in nature. So all those things all the opportunities that come up with the changes in the seasons, and how we can take advantage of that in the art therapy practice. But for me, the most important part in this chapter was this quote here that says that the land upholds ideals, ideologies, cultural and political identities, which we should not be taking for granted. So we should not be taking for granted what every place might mean for different people. So, for example, a place that can be a source of national pride or belonging for some people, the same place could be a source of memories of forced movement or displacement for some other people. And our therapists should really be mindful of their clients' geopolitical connection to nature or this land and the emotional experiences that arise in relation to this space. So we shouldn't take for granted that visiting an outdoor space, it would necessarily be a positive experience for everyone. Sorry, I can hear some talking on the background. Yeah. I'm just going to move on. And again, I guess that this is a quote that very much captures that says that however large or small, these felt experiences can become deeply symbolic, standing for something hidden, dark, disturbing, shameful, or repressed. When our exposure within nature becomes too much, too cold, too wet, too mucky, too dry, too hot, too prickly, too vast, or too emotional, then we meet an edge between oneself and one's limit. And here there are opportunities and challenges, a place to be tested, to push further, a place where we might challenge and redefine our sense of self. Again, I think that's a very, very powerful quote there from Eagleton. So looking into all of those studies that have been done so far, these are some of the most common themes that are coming out from all these studies. First of all, is that when we are doing art therapy in nature and outdoor spaces, it helps us to gain perspective. It helps us to take a step back, and look at our lives as a whole. In a way, it can make us feel reassuringly small, like Kate Sutton has mentioned. And this experience can be comparable to a flight experience. So imagine when you're flying, when you see from your window, all of those people underneath, and all of them having their own lives and situations and problems they're dealing with. Similarly, when we're working in nature, we can start noticing all those animals and beings that are all having their own lives, and can help us perhaps take perspective, take a step back and look at our lives as a whole. Another thing that is coming up more and more often is that it allows us to express ourselves perhaps more safely, and sometimes staying with this discomfort in a way that somehow still feels safe and comfortable in nature or when we're being outside. Another thing that nature-based art therapy really helps with is understanding our special positionality of our emotions. So understanding the symbolic importance of some places and how these trigger some emotional responses to us. So again, that was something that was coming up from all the articles and the chapters that I was reviewing. And you can also have, working in nature can have grounding effects. This is very much confirmed by studies in neuroscience that prove how working in nature can help to calm both our brain and our senses. For example, even the simple act of a gentle breeze against our skin can relax our nervous system and improve our self-regulation, according to neuroscience studies. Or even seeing landscapes can increase the production of serotonin in our body, which is how many antidepressant medications, at least in Western medicine, this is how they're working. So nature can have all of those effects. It can also help us to explore existential themes of life, so things like death, change, renewal, or loss. And it can also allow us to explore the seasonal changes that are happening in nature, can again help us explore all of those themes of birth and death and growth that mirror the life changes. There is a lovely quote again from McMaster, published in 2013, that says that every time a plant dies or a material decomposes, therein lies an opportunity to discuss death and express a full range of emotions, to feel heard and less isolated. And another lovely quote from Sikrikan about, sorry, I'll get to that in the next theme. But in terms of the sensory engagement, like I said before, specifically the study from Lilleboom, who found that by engaging with nature-based materials, it helped us to engage our senses, and that gradually that can connect us more to nature. And finally, the thing that is coming up more and more often as well is how doing art therapy in nature can help build compassionate care for nature. And Sikrikan said that as we begin to understand more of our own wounds, we may begin to better understand the wounds that we inflict upon our planet. So really discovering ourselves when we are in nature, it can help us understand the impact that our actions can have on nature as well. So these are some of the most common themes that are coming up from nature-based research and practice so far. In one of my studies, what I try to do is I try to understand how through the arts we can build higher connection to nature. Essentially, because there are not that many studies in art therapy, I decided to review studies focusing on arts as well as arts therapies. And I was focusing specifically on children and young people. So this is a systematic review that I did last year. It was published in Frontiers in Psychology. You can find the reference at the end of the presentation. But essentially, what we were finding out was that arts was acting as an inclusive medium to increase connection with nature, make the relationship with nature more explicit, but also help children and young people to understand environmental issues and to explore ways to prevent future environmental disasters, which in turn would lead to higher environmental sustainability. In this systematic review, we also focus on some specific activities and how this led to higher nature connection. For example, we found that when we're doing arts in nature, this made children and young people want to spend more time in nature. So for example, some young people who might essentially, at the beginning of the sessions, they wouldn't feel that comfortable being in outdoor spaces. Through doing arts, they gradually start to feel more comfortable being outside, and they gradually feeling more connected to nature. There were also, from this review, we found some identity-focused and self-reflective creative activities that essentially those help children to gradually see themselves as part of nature and nature as part of themselves. So this is what has been defined as a pro-environmental identity. So we found out that identity-focused activities can help with pro-environmental identity. Also, creative activities that help us to understand what can be done to prevent future environmental disasters is what led to higher pro-environmental behaviors. So not just caring for the environment, but trying to take protective actions towards the environment. And also those activities help some children and young people to manage their emotions of eco-anxiety and eco-distress. There were also some really interesting activities related to community-based creative activism, and which showed how this would then help to bring more positive behavioral changes at the whole community, so collectively. And all of those changes essentially can can bring environmental sustainability, but also encourage more time, encourage more people to want to spend more time outside. And start their own circle of feeling connected to nature. Again, this was a very large study, so you can take your time, and if that's of interest to you, look at it at your own time. But there are some very interesting, fascinating findings about specific activities and how they can help us connect with nature. And the other study I wanted to talk about, like I said, it's eco-capabilities. This project was founded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. Essentially, was situated at the intersection between three issues: children's well-being and a concern around children's well-being, their disconnect from the environment, and also a lack of engagement with the arts in school curricula. So what we found in this study, where artists were working with children and they were taking children out in nature for 1 full day every week for 8 weeks. We worked with 101 children in total. We found that doing arts in nature helped them to develop those 8 what we call eco-capabilities: autonomy, safety, identity, emotional well-being, relationality, both with human but also with non-human. They also promoted, the session promoted their sense of imagination and their sense of spirituality. Again, in the interest of time, instead of talking more about the study, I wanted to really present a very short film, which is only 2 minutes long, that describes the impact that these sessions had on the children. And it's coming from the children themselves, so it's a bit more powerful, I guess. I hope that works again. You can all hear it.
We get to go outside to do art. We normally make it about what we are inspired by. Like all the class were inspired by bugs and birds.
I was noticing how many different things there are to the world. It definitely made me think how lucky we are to have such a beautiful world.
We need nature because we can't survive without nature.
There is so much inspiration in working outdoors.
The children said it was wild, it wasn't like going into nature, it's like you are nature.
And I think that's physicality, being in nature is so important. It was like an invitation to think, an invitation to imagine.
By offering creative and art activities, it invites them to actually slow down and engage with nature. And the nature gives them materials, the palette, the inspiration, and then the freedom to create, to intervene in the environment.
So much more full of life, so much more confident in building friendships, not with the usual children they would play with. They're taking more risks.
He's taken on slightly more leadership roles as well, and that's also transferred into the classroom. He's sort of more confident. One child has shown better listening skills for definite because he's been so interested, he's been more engaged to write through doing the drawings and writing, but the artist really made them really closely, and they discovered things that they didn't notice were there before.
It's been lovely to see those children who don't normally excel in so many different areas of the curriculum finally come out their shells.
To do more stuff outside. And when you're outside, there's lots of space and it's calm and it's really peaceful.
Yeah, beyond the gates. I had one perspective on nature. I didn't really like it, but when you took us there, it gave me a different perspective on it, and now I really like it.
We didn't even need songs because the birds were singing for us.
So I hope that gives a bit of an overview about the impact that the sessions had on children, coming from the children themselves, which I found very powerful to hear them talking instead of us saying what we think that happened. There are also a few upcoming studies, although there is not much at the moment out there in terms of evidence of nature-based art therapy. All 3 art therapy journals have a call at the moment opened for submissions for nature-based art therapy research and practice. So at the International Journal of Art Therapy, we have a special issue with a deadline in March 2024. So we very much invite submissions on nature-based art therapy. At the same time, the Canadian Journal of Art Therapy and the American Journal of Art Therapy, they also have their own special issues coming up in 2024. So if you are doing work in this area, please check them out. It might be a great place to submit your studies. And then finally, in terms of future directions, looking at all of those things as a whole, thinking about where we're going next, what is needed in terms of research primarily. So first of all, I think what we need is more realist evaluation. So trying to understand what works and for whom. I don't think we should assume that all people have a good relationship with nature, and we should not take for granted that people want to be outside. So I think really need to focus on that, what works for whom, or focusing specifically on some groups such as people with disabilities, how we can make things, nature-based art therapy, more accessible, more inclusive for them. But also think about, for example, the current conflict between Israel and Palestine, where Muslims or Jewish people would feel safe and comfortable, and they wouldn't have to worry about their safety when we're working outside. So we really need to be mindful of the contextual changes in our society and how that can affect whether or not people want to be outside and which places they want to be at, specifically that they want to work at. Again, we have a lot of great studies, practice-based studies that focus on the process of nature-based art therapy, but much less on the outcomes, so what outcomes are being achieved. We also need a bit more on understanding how we can develop more sustainable materials. So, for example, the fact that all artistic materials come wrapped up in plastic, obviously this is something concerning for the environment. So how can we make sure we use more sustainable materials, but also more culturally sensitive materials? As with everything, we need more on services that are co-produced and co-designed with service users. And because we're working outdoors, there are so many challenges that are coming up because of that. So we really need to be mindful of the accessibility and the inclusivity issues, and essentially the feasibility issues that are coming with working outside or in nature. And I think what we need is we're nowhere near experimental or large studies. I think what we need at this stage is robust, really good quality studies to understand how can we improve art therapy outside or in natural spaces. And finally, I would really like to end this presentation with one of my favorite quotes from Eleonora Duse, published in Harvard in 1908, which says that, "If the sight of the blue skies fills you with joy, if a blade of grass springing up in the fields has power to move you, if the simple things of nature have a message that you understand, rejoice, for your soul is alive." Thank you very much for the invitation to speak this event to this event today. It was a pleasure to it's a pleasure to be here. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of studies and practice that I talked about, but if you want to discuss about any of that in more detail, feel free to email me or find me on Twitter or social media. I'll be more than happy to respond to any questions or have a discussion around that. There are references at the end. You can check them at your own time, because I'm sure everything will be shared afterwards. So thank you very much. I hope you found that useful.